and I'm a senior program manager at Humantam. I'll just go through some quick housekeeping rules before I hand over to my colleague Kim. Please feel free to use our chat for questions during the webinar, and then also to let you know the session is going to be recorded, and we'll be sharing that recording out to you all. And another exciting thing that I can share with you, and we will talk about this a bit more at the end, is this webinar is part of a webinar series that we have titled Innovating Towards a Viable Future. And this is our 2026 webinar series where we will have a lot of interesting conversations with folks across this sector, across geographies, to really talk about some of the pressing issues and emerging issues that we're seeing in our social good sector. I will hand the mic over to you, Kim, and I just want to thank you all for making time to be here with us today.
Thank you so much. I am excited to start with this conversation. In some ways, it feels like continuing a conversation with a group of old friends because we actually started last April. Ali, myself, Jackie, and Andrews came together last April when it felt like we were in the middle of a storm to kind of talk about what was happening. At the time, there were systems that were crumbling. There were identities that were feeling shaken, and there was a lot of uncertainty about what comes next. And so we had a really interesting conversation about 9-10 months ago. Many of the things that we talked about have stayed with me since. They've stayed with me all year. And because for many of us last year in 2025, it was a year of sense making. There was a good amount of disruption. And for many of us, we were trying to figure out, well, what does this continuing disruption mean for me? What does it mean for my organization? What does it mean for my community? And so many of you on the call today and listening to the recording will have done that work. And many of you will have already done the kind of processing that needs to be done about what it means for you. And so the question that we're here to answer today is, well, what do we do about it? And so today is really about checking in after a year of disruption, a year of transition, and asking the question, what has held, what has changed, and what are we actually willing to carry forward or let go of as we move into a transition space. So I wanted to share a little bit about from our first conversation about what stuck with me. I kind of want to set the scene for a couple of the quotes from our panelists today that stuck with me, and then I'm going to turn the conversation over to them. And I'm going to let you all introduce yourselves as you go. So I want to say, Ali, last April, you said something that I have been sitting with all year. You said, we've done this before. We are in the middle of this kind of fire, and the fire has burned down all of the big houses, and huts have grown in their place. And so for what you, it was, the question is, what is the most important thing to save in the house? So if the house is on fire, what do we take out with us? And then Jackie, I loved that you kind of countered back with, you said, yeah, well, we are in this together, but we are also not together. We may all be in the same house and we came in the same door, but we were in different rooms and on different floors in this house. So what does that mean? And then Andrew, 9 months ago, you said, in order to change anything, we have to go back to this existential question of why. You said the why, the we, the will. So why are we doing this? Why are we in this? And then who is we, right? Who are we doing it for? Who do we actually mean? And then are we actually willing to do it? So you kind of put out this call to action that said, you need to know your why, you need to understand your we, and you need to answer the question, are we willing? And only you and your organization can answer that question. Are we actually willing to do the thing? I lay all that out there as kind of as a frame, as a reminder of what we said. Ali, I already see you're laughing because you're like, yeah, these are real questions. I want to know my big questions as we're coming into the discussion today. What lessons did you learn last year in 2025? How do we move forward with what I'm calling practical optimism? So not kind of aspirational, practical optimism in 2026. And as we do so, what is worth carrying forward? And are we willing to do the change that is required? I want to hear what you all have to say. I'm going to start with how I've been starting every space I have held in the last year with kind of just a pulse check to see how you're all doing, because I do think it's important that we start as people. And as you begin, please do introduce yourselves in the best way that you see fit. Who are you? How are you coming into this space? So my first question, and Aisha, maybe we want to spotlight the folks on the panel are, how are you? Where are you now as compared to last April, and how are you doing in January of 2026? Maybe we'll go in the order that I just kind of informally introduced you all. So Ali, then Jackie, then Andrew.
Okay. First, thank you so much for hosting us again. I highly recommend everyone to go and watch last year webinar. For me, looking back at last year and right now, I think it's so funny and it's so interesting how historic days seem so ordinary when you live them. And I'm saying that because I feel that's what happened last year. The time was mainly focusing at those questions that you answered: the how, the why, the analyzing and understanding what was happening, and also seeing how to move from there. For me, I use those different hats that I had because I have background in operations, in program designs, coming from my time at country operations in Asia, Middle East, and Africa. So I leveraged that so much last year. I also spent so much time working with executives and senior leaders, focusing at their governance, reimagining and rethinking their models and organizational transformations. And I also used my hat as a humanitarian diplomat, where I tried to build bridges between NGOs and private sector, or NGOs and foundations, and NGOs and economists, and few others. And that's why I'm saying it's been really a year operating and working on the edge of chaos.
Operating and working on the edge of chaos. I love that. Jackie, how are you doing?
Hi everybody. My name is Jacqueline Asiimwe. I live and work in Uganda, but my heart beats for Africa. The organization that I lead, called CivSource Africa, stands at the nexus between philanthropy and civil society. And so when you asked your question, Kim, two songs came to mind in describing where I am, and I hope I can sing them very quickly. If my brother's in trouble, so am I. The idea that we are all in this together, right? You alluded to the fact that I talked about we're in the house, though in different rooms. But yes, we entered this development work, this social justice work, from different spaces, from different places, animated by different things. And then we get in there and we are each trying to work it out. But if we're in trouble, so am I. Like, what touches one touches all. And then the other is lean on me. When you're not strong, I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry on. So again, that too points to solidarity, that some of us are emerging through this actually stronger, feeling more stable, and others of us are still feeling our way through this. Others of us are having to pack our bags and leave, right? So and all those need leaning. Even the strong ones will need people to lean on, because you're strong today and maybe not so strong tomorrow. So for me, those two are the two ends that I think we were working with coming out of 2025. And the fact again and again that we need each other. We truly need each other.
I mean, anytime you can start with a song, I'm here for it. Thank you for that, Jackie. Andrew, let me spotlight you all so I can see you, and then go ahead. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, and thank you so much. And I think I'll start the same place. Unfortunately, I don't have a song on mind right now. And I'm not sure my voice will compete with you, Jackie. I give up. I lose that. But I'll enjoy the songs. I love both songs. Really beautiful voice. And thank you so much for inviting us again, and of course for putting up this series. It's in many ways leading the way to give the space to, bounce back and hear. For me, when I read what you sent on our emails, I'd almost forgotten April last year. And as I alluded yesterday when we had the conversation, 1 year feels like 40 years, but it can also feel like one day. And as we emerged, April, May, June, we were seeing things happening. I mean, I come from Civil Connections, which is a small organization here in Copenhagen, and working across many geographies. We have a lot of projects here in Europe, but we have a lot of projects in Africa, and in Africa, especially looking at the grassroots. So our collaborations are with organizations that are working with people that are commonly, off the radar of mainstream funding. And so when the mainstream funding was crumbling, that group was probably going to be one of the most alienated groups. And one of the discussions we were having in Copenhagen were, what's our role? So if we lose our funding, what will happen to those groups? And one of the discussions we had in here was, when we started Civil Connections, we wanted to start it for life. We wanted to stand with people for life, not to close it when it was convenient. So for us, we took the long term, and so that's where we are. And that's why I started with 1 year feels like 40 years, but that's the mindset. So the mindset that we've gone around with is we may not have resources, we may not have all the structures that we have been used to, but it's also the time for us to make up our minds, really. Are we in it for 40 years? And what can we look at that can go the 40 years? And I think those are some of the conversations that could be interesting now.
Yeah, that's such an interesting concept, this idea of time. And you're right, last year both felt like a minute and it felt like forever, because there was so much change that was packed in it. And yet, so how am I showing up to this space? I'm showing up as someone who has held a lot of space and had a lot of conversations in the last year with people that are going through it, that are navigating the change, as you said, Jackie, and seeing it both as a devastating thing and a really positive thing, as an opportunity. So kind of all different spaces. And as someone who is bringing people together and doing a lot of listening and digesting of that information, one of the big lessons that came out for me last year was this idea of resilience and regeneration, and how do we learn from the world around us. And time was a big lesson for me, as you just said, Andrew. If we are to learn from, for example, the natural world, ecology, if there is a disruption in a forest, yes, trees will die, animals will die, flowers will be disrupted, etc. But over a long period of time, things stay the same, right? The world, the forest regenerates itself. And so my career may feel disrupted, but it is but a blip in the longer trajectory. 40 years from now, the needs that we are meeting will still be there. And so what does that look like? How do we look at time, deep time and kind of short time, as we are navigating this kind of liminal space? I'm interested to hear what you all think about that and how you're navigating that idea of time.
Shall I go first and say just a
Please.
few things? I don't think we should underestimate the resilience of the individuals and the organizations within this system or within this sector. what I saw last year, I witnessed exactly so many times before in so many country operations and so many locations where crises happen or incidents happen. And this time it was mainly funding, but we had so many access constraints before, we had so many operational challenges before, we had funding issues before, we had different type of challenges hitting us as individuals and organizations within this system so many years, not only last year. And again, the people stayed, the frontliners, they were there. We continued working, we continued delivering. So from my perspective, the shock that we got last year, of course, it produced this institutional shock that affected the sector in general, but the people, in the end of the day, stayed. People and organizations tried to survive in different ways and delivered. This came in different ways, and this survival was also in different ways, but it was just another evidence that we have strong resilience. And if I want to describe 2025 in one single word, it will be resilience. So that's how I saw it. We really have strong roots out there.
Yeah, strong roots. I love that. Jackie, what were you going to say?
There's you bring up so much, Kim. Yes, indeed, what we're going through requires us to have maybe not a different, but an appreciation and awareness of time. And time both as a continuum. There were things before us, there will be things absolutely after us. Sometimes we center ourselves in time as though, we're the first ever to experience it. And it can feel that way. So I'm not even denigrating what people are feeling through. But when we stand back and look at the arc of time, then we do know that, yes, indeed, ours is a blip. But what we do in this moment, in the times that we have, is also very important. And so one of the things that we did a lot last year was also to think about and talk about what are the times and what do they require of us. Indeed, our conversation last year was about the very things you talked about, Kim. What do we let go of? And oh my goodness, letting go is hard. If we're going to learn from nature, yes, trees shed all the time. So what are those things that we're holding on to, which we should have shed years ago, that no longer serve us? But it's scary, absolutely. And then you can also only regenerate to the extent of the depth of your roots, right? And I guess that was the other thing in assessing, are we really deeply rooted? And what does that look like? What does that mean? In Uganda, we often ask ourselves, if as a whole sector we were annihilated completely, would anyone feel us? And I think that is part of the question around rooting. Are we truly rooted and relevant for the time and the times? And then finally, you also spoke about transition, which itself speaks about a time span, and that it's not a moment, it's not an event. In fact, when one is starting, another is it's really cyclical in nature. And so being ready to embrace multiple transitions in a big transition, understanding the time and the times continuously, and then trying to, like you said, come out of this knowing, if this is our time, if we were born for such a time as this, can we understand the time and understand what we need to do, what we need to shed, and how we go on? So all of that, was happening for us, either individually as organizations or even together every time we sat together as the sector.
Gosh, it's a lot to hold, isn't it? It's a lot to hold at once. But one thing that I love what you just said was, yes, we may be but a blip, but this is our moment. And what do we do with that moment is going to make a difference, because everything we do now, this whole process is both a transition, and we are both bridging to the future, and we are building the future as we go. So whatever we do now, how we are actively living our values, how we are showing up for ourselves and for each other and for our communities, is building the thing that will come next. And I think that is just so important. And as you said, okay, so here's my question to you all. looking back from our last conversation back April, what has held up for you and what now does feel kind of incomplete or outdated? What are the things that you think we should have shed long ago that kind of were either shed in the last year or need to continue to be? I open it up to whoever has something that speaks to them.
Okay, I have so many things in my mind right now, but I think from my perspective, last year I had to work at different layers. Sometimes I would be operational, other times I'm looking at macro, the other day micro level, and so I had to go through different lenses and use different hats. But from my perspective, there were certain things that we did well. There were as a humanitarian development sector or society, and there were certain things that they were challenging and put us in a different situation. So let me start with general diagnosis. I think in general, I saw, and I'm still seeing, moral injury. I could feel that so many people within this sector, within organizations, they are doing work. Some of them, they don't really believe in it. And there is a bit of clash between what we are doing and the values and the principles that we stand by. And I think because we are, in a way or another, in a survival mode, so that put our values and ethics under so much pressure. The second thing, we really have change fatigue right now. Several changes happening, and it's keep happening, and it is happening, and it will continue happening. That put us under so much pressure, and I could see how the engagement is dropping. I could also see how collaboration becoming more transactional, more than sustainable, driven by values and principles. Bureaucracy is becoming visible and less tolerated by many. I feel as individuals and organizations, we have this identity split because we have the humanitarian and we need to focus at the business side. So this also put us under this identity questions. Few other things, but on a positive note, I see so many emerging leaders speaking about change, advocating for change, leading change, and many coming from the global south and many coming from those grassroots local organizations. That's a very positive thing that I'm witnessing. And again, one of my favorite things is that once more, and again, those leaders at country level, at area level, they proved that they are there to support communities, not for a career, not for title, not for salary, and so many other things. I want to close this by saying I do believe that last year and right now, it's proving that progress is not always a straightforward path. Sometimes we pause, sometimes we take steps back, and sometimes we zigzag. And I feel that many organizations, especially local organizations, and I'm saying that because I spent so much time with them last year, they progressed in a way or another. Maybe that was because they zigzagged a bit or they took a few steps back and to move forward. But I feel we are progressing, although we are under so much pressure.
Andrew, did you want to add something?
I can add something quick, but it's amazingly said, Ali, and because you are in a space and you're many, and I think we go back to Jackie's last time of the many rooms we are talking about, and it's so important to always place it in a context. And what I would start with was the ability to have these honest conversations, because everyone was facing the same, maybe in different magnitudes, but all of a sudden values were on the weighing scale. What do we do? What brings me in here? What why am I here? What should I do here? So all those things were all of a sudden on a weighing scale. And Ali, you're totally right. The many partners that we work with on ground had two reactions. So and it comes from the space of when you're sent in shock, you have two ways to go. But we know that when you're sent in shock, that's where your character is tested, your resilience is tested. And that's where you know how deep your roots are. But a lot of the local organizations on the ground also realize that we can't count on the world. But what if we can't count on the world? What do we do? And that was a very strong feeling. Whoever you talked to, people would start by asking, "Oh, what are we gonna do?" And I say, "Yeah, but what are you gonna do? Because there isn't going to be money." So people looked inwards, and went back to basics and said, "So what's our character? And why are we even in here?" And I think that's one of the really biggest outcome of the circles that I'm in from last year and moving on to this year. And of course, it's a zigzag. And I'm looking at what are we gonna build out of this? What's going forward? How is that gonna look like? And can we still bring the same honest conversations, or are we going to return to business as usual? And I think that's also a conversation to be had going forward.
I would add into your point, Ali, around, progress is not linear. And sometimes there's real value in not just the zigzag, but also the pause, the moment in time for reflection, for digestion, for processing of what is happening, so that you can respond or react proactively and from a place of abundance rather than reactively from a place of defense. Because Andrew, what you just said reminded me that, yeah, we don't want to just go back to business as usual. And we do that when we're in this survival mode. We do that when we are in a place of our default behaviors, our default risk tolerances. We run the risk of kind of going back to what is comfortable. This is not that time. We need to be looking ahead despite the change fatigue, because frankly, I think for the rest of my career, our careers, we will be navigating complex change. There will not be, this is not a one and done disruption. We will be navigating complex change for the rest of our lives. So this is something that we need to, it's a skill set we need to be kind of getting good at. I wonder what you all think about that, about how we get good at that, and then also how we approach bridging and building towards the future in such a way that is different than the old, that honors what should be moved forward, what we should take out of the burning building, but then also is what we want to leave behind in an honest way. Jackie, what do you think?
So two quick thoughts, Kim, as we were talking about the fact that this moment is, it's a zigzag and change. We know is never linear. It's I think challenging when the funding you receive assumes a linear path, where you're still required to do a log frame where you can almost state for a fact how, what change is going to happen and how, and with how many people. And it's just like, are we in the same are we in the same world? Like what? Yeah. So I think that is still a space that is still uncomfortable. Andrew, to your issue of can we have the honest conversations? I think that one is one to still have. Yes, some sections of our partners and funders get it, but when you're holding pots from different donors, you still feel like you're walking a schizophrenic path, right? Right? This one gets it, this one doesn't. So in one instance, I'm behaving with a donor that gets it differently, and here I'm contorting myself for a donor that doesn't get it and requires me to live in that box that was set for me 2 years ago, as though change didn't happen, right? So yeah, it's still that, and yes, I know it's easy to say no to funding that doesn't work for you. Been there, done that, and yeah, you still have staff that are facing you, and so it's, yeah, those are the things that still boggle my mind. What does that world look like where we're all working with that frame? Was one thing. The other, Kim, and I know we had this conversation a bit yesterday about survival, that sometimes it can be heard as a dirty word, almost, that you're surviving. You should be. And it's just like, guys, even in surviving, there are skills that we are learning. And maybe sometimes I have to go back to my default in order to then, in fact, spring much further than where I could be, right? So how do we also honor those that have to maybe stay a bit in that survival space or mode, or even have gone back there? And we talked about things like sometimes it's even things outside us, those of us that are facing political situations where you're just like, no, hunker down, don't move, just pretend, like, so where you're facing almost existential threats, you go back maybe to survival mode. So how do we hold grace and space for each other to say, yes, of course, we want to bridge, we want to go forward. We know that change is always happening, but some of us might have to do the retreating as well. Or the surviving. Yeah, let me not, surviving is not necessarily retreating, but yeah, it's how do we also honor the skills that we learn as we're surviving?
I'm seeing smiles and nods, so I want to just open it up. Go.
Yeah. Okay. Yesterday, after our conversations, I spent my evening reflecting on that word. I had to go back, reflecting on my own personal journey and my journey within the sector. When I look back at, I was born in the global south. Because of the conflict in my country, I was displaced, and then I was a refugee, and then I had to survive that situation and build from there and continue in my journey in life, professionally and personally. But what I witnessed in my own personal journey and within the work and the professional arena is that cities, they go through crisis and development. Economies, they collapse and they rise. Villages and towns, they get destroyed and then they get rebuilt again. But what I found, that what I carried with me and what many people carried with them while surviving were values and ethics. Now, of course, a crisis put all of us under so much pressure and pressured our values because we had to survive. So we needed to make some choices or take some decisions that maybe they didn't align with certain values and ethics. But from my perspective, now what's happening within this ecosystem and what happened with the communities that we are serving, no matter what the survival will look like and the future will also look like, we must protect those values and principles that we are standing by. This is number one. Number two, I found that I usually say hope is not a strategy, but actually hope is an excellent survival tactic. When I look back at my own personal journeys and the teams and the organization that I was working with, hope made us continue delivering. Sometimes it was an illusion, but while it wasn't a strategy, it was a survival tactic. The last thing that I want to say, and I'm still reflecting on that, if people think there is invisible river, don't tell them it doesn't exist. Build them invisible bridge. Because many people are now need leaders who are ambassadors of hope, who must keep that hope not only as our tactic, but as a bridge so that we pass that. But I really like, Jackie, yesterday you inspired me, and I continued reflecting and thinking about that survival thing, and I'm still doing so.
So yesterday, for those on the call, was our prep call when I had to stop the conversation because I said, no, we need to have this conversation tomorrow. Hold those thoughts. But yeah, anytime someone raises something that makes you feel uncomfortable and you have to sit with, I think it's a good thing, because there's a real kernel of truth in there. And I think this tension between survival is so important. What I heard from you, and then I'm going to see if you have any thoughts, Andrew, what I heard from both of you is, yeah, sometimes we place value on these words, but really, what does it mean, survival? It could mean going back to basics. It could mean going back and learning the skills, the resilient skills that we learn in order to make it through a hard time. On the flip side, it could also mean regressing or kind of sitting into this analysis paralysis, which may be necessary, but may be unhelpful. So it's always a judgment call, kind of in the individual circumstance. I am hearing again and again from all of you, going back to values and ethics. I'm hearing again and again from you all the type of leadership qualities and behaviors that are needed in this moment. And I'd love to unpack any of that as we go forward. But I want to hand it over to you, Andrew, and see what your thoughts are.
Survival. I'll start there, I think. And you know, as you were talking, I was thinking, but again, context, right? What are you surviving? Because I mean, if you told someone in the middle of a war zone, the same word wouldn't mean the same as me in Copenhagen, and the same word wouldn't mean the same as my partner in a farmer community in rural Uganda, whose challenge is not necessarily life-threatening, but an industry created, a context created. So we also, you know, in a way stand, and I'm happy that a word like this can be digested the way we are digesting it, because we have a lot of words that we use, but we never put them under the different lenses. What are we saying exactly when we use these words? And of course, I wanted to start by saying, yeah, but when we say survival, the way we are defining it is actually the zigzag we are talking about. We go back there and we come out, we bounce back and we go back and we bounce back. But we, you know, when we are, and I don't know where people are on this call, when we are so big a world, that context is different, then you know that is important to think about. And then yesterday after our call, it wasn't anything related to this. I had a chat, I had another meeting, and someone was asking me, Andrew, how will the state of the world be going forward? And I told him, you know, it's very funny, because if you asked me in Denmark, in the center of Greenland being needed to be bought, then I would almost say, oh my God, oh, you're going to collaborate with an American organization. Oh, have you checked them out? Have you checked them out? Have you done all your checks on this organization? And that wasn't the case last week or a month before. And that means, and so I told him that when I look at what has happened the last month, it also means that I could actually easily, at the same time, work with anyone else in the world, as long as the values that I bring in this collaboration, in this, you know, in the work we are gonna do, are at peace with me. So I want to go back to, again, what is your heart at peace with? Because it doesn't matter. I could define your values, but if you don't believe in them and you're not at peace with them, then they are not your values. So I think that's the first part there, that whether it's me, and if I enter into the space of the organization, and if I enter into the space of international global collaborations, the values I bring in those engagements have to be at peace with me. And if I lose those values, then it's a deliberate decision that I'm losing them. But then I know then that I'm taking that decision to lose those values. And I think that's again back to the honest conversation. What values do I bring in this space?
Okay, I want to say two things. First of all, Andrew, you're going back to context, which I think is so interesting and important. Yeah. What are you surviving? That's where the nuance and the depth of this word is, right? Surviving something, a war or something necessary on the front lines is different than something that's not life-threatening that you just want to protect. And I think that is where I think there is nuance that often gets missed in the conversation. So thank you for raising that, because that was an aha moment for me. I want to dig a little bit deeper into this idea of values under pressure, because it's something that I've been thinking about quite a bit in the last year, and you all keep raising it. So I want to unpack it. There is this idea of values, and I think anyone who works in the space in the social good world that we work with is going to be value aligned, right? And that is nice to say when you have values posted on your webpage. There is a difference between saying these are our values and we actively live our values under pressure. And so I want to unpack that a little bit. What does living your values under pressure look like? And then what are and it's easy to say, to do, that we should do this, but what are the real hard the real barriers of where this gets hard? Jackie, you raised it where you said, yeah, progress is not linear and we should take the bigger picture, but I can't have an honest conversation if one of my funders says, well, you need to create a log frame out of complex change. Those are two values that are kind of at odds with each other. So are organizations and individuals living their values under pressure? Where is it getting hard and what do we do about it?
I wish I knew. I wish we knew. But and I'm only going to add to that list in terms of the kinds of values under pressure that I was feeling from where I was standing. And Ali alluded to one of them, this tension between business and nonprofit. So everybody's telling you don't no longer survive and you need to be. I'm like, yeah, but maybe, not maybe, when I started out this work, I had choices. When I chose the nonprofit path, it was a deliberate choice. And so when you're asking me to go this way, what about business has changed that suddenly? And so it's been, that interesting tension between, where are we landing on this question? The other one that we had to navigate was also collaborating with business. Again, not to paint business with one brush, but yeah, that also understanding, just like the development nonprofit sector is also not the same. But there are ways in which the business sector has been presented. Maybe they're myths or realities, but presented as though their values and ours don't. So when you're trying to collaborate, what does that even mean and look like? Like Andrew says, should you check each other out, right? And say, this X that I'm going to go to for a partnership, and if I bump against something that I'm not values aligned with, what will I do? So there was that. And then lastly, back and at office, one of the questions we contended with was, if there was no money, because are we in this for the money? If there was no money, would you still do this work? And the silence and the looking at each other that happened was like, and not judging it, it was like, yeah, maybe there are things we have to face also about what we think are our values. So those, just to share three things that we were sort of dancing with from our context, Andrew, last year.
Well, then I'll come in, and thank you for painting, and especially the last question: if we didn't have money, would you? That's a very interesting one, because I mean, let's look at it from a fuller perspective, right? And And that's the perspective of, should we, I'm trying to look for the best wording. Sometimes the language goes out of my head. I start thinking in my local language. But should I take sides or should I not take sides? It's one of the biggest decisions we make every day. And that's where, again, going back to my emphasis on where is your heart on this, which is basically the total sum of which values you bring in, as long as you have defined them, is, in my head, I'm thinking the leader that will navigate that space is also the leader that's able to move people to where the best possible deal is for the total sum of values in a space. I have the chance, or I've had the privilege of working in civil society for now close to 30 years. And I've also worked in business. And now recently, I'm working in a university, lecturing and doing a lot of academic things. And I see that what you find in business and how people work in business and how people are thinking is based on, what should I call them, kind of thematics of how that business takes place. But if you look at exactly the way we do in civil society, it's also based on thematics. The strategy you make in an NGO doesn't look very different from a strategy you make in business. It's just the objective you want to gain. One of the things that then we have discussed with my colleagues in business, and this has been a lot of big debates. Why are you only focusing on that? Why is it not important for this? And then you find people are not thinking about it, not because they don't want to, but because they have never been exposed to that you have to think like that. The thematics of their whole thought, philosophy, have never imagined thinking like that, because thinking like that is lost. And it's exactly the same that we carry when we are in the civil society space. So let me try to go a little bit to the values and the leader of tomorrow. And how then, because when I'm leading, I'm both leading for myself, but also leading for an organization. How do we play the facilitative role of bringing as many people as possible to a place where we think we can benefit the world? And especially the communities, the groups we work with. And this is not to say sell your soul, but it's again, which values do you bring and how do you move people to understand those values? Do I know exactly how to do that? I think I know how to do it in the context, but can I teach it? It's difficult. It needs to be lived.
Yeah, can you teach it? Because I think it comes back to what Jackie said, which is, if I come into a situation where it's not values aligned, what do I do? It's one of those things where you can only know until you are faced with it. We can talk about it, but it is action oriented. Ali, I want to hear your thoughts on the values question, and then I have a final question for you all.
I don't really have a simple answer. I fully agree with Jackie and Andrew mentioned, and I don't want to repeat that. I just think that when I look at all the countries where I have been and lived in Asia, Middle East, Africa, and Europe, they call different things dreams. There is the American dream, there is the Syrian dream, the Afghani dream, the Lebanese dream, the Nigerian dream, etc., etc. What they have in common, they want better future. They want life. People brand it with different ways, but people want to live a better life for them, for their children, for the coming generations. Now, when I look at values in general, I think based on cultures and religion and sectors and jobs, and maybe people will have different values and perspectives. But for me, and that's the lens I see this sector through, is about three important words: and they are the most important in what we do as a humanitarian development sector, and they are we, the people. I always repeat that. I always say that. Now, how do you understand those three words? Of course, it changes from generation to another, from organization to another, from individual to another. But from my perspective, take that and build on it. And maybe the values are going to be your principles along the way. Maybe they will be your North Star. I really don't have a solid answer when it comes to that. I think, because I spent my whole life trying to find exactly the values and the things that I stand by. So it's very difficult for me to share with you a set of that. But I think it's very important to integrate them within your day-to-day life as a leader and as an organization.
Thank you for that. Okay, we started this conversation almost a year ago when we felt very much in the middle of kind of the apex of disruption. We are now about a year out, and I think, as I said at the start, many people have started to do the sense making. You understand what this means for you, for good or for bad. My question to you all is, from your particular perspective, from your vantage point, what is one thing that could genuinely move 2026 forward? Whether that's a choice or a shift or a practice, what is one thing that could move 2026 forward? Because I think we think of these big things and it's too big, right? These are too aspirational. But I'm focused this year on practical optimism. If we were to be practically optimistic, what's one thing that you think could move 2026 forward? Maybe we'll go Andrew, Jackie, Ali.
On the spot, that's a difficult question to answer, Kim, but I'm gonna try. And I like to be practical, because we can talk the whole day, but at the end of the day, when I come back home, my two kids will look at me and say, "What are we gonna eat?" So it comes to that. Which bed am I going to sleep in? Do we have a door that will lock the house? So it's basics. And one of the things, so imagine draw four, just you have a paper and just draw a cross, so you have 4 boxes. And what we have thought about from our point of view is, and I don't know, there must be a model somewhere that looks like that. But in the top one, on your left, we have put our inner functioning. Who are we? What are we doing? What are our processes? Why are we here? Why do we do this? And then in the second one, we've put, who are we collaborating with right now? And what did they gain from us? And what do we gain from them? And what do we do with them? So what we did last year was an examination and a lot of questions on which partnership, why are we, and are we living the different things that we've decided we need to live according, we need to work according to this, or have we drifted? And so can we get back to the path? Can we get back to the path of both the organization? Because when we signed up to the organization, we believe, we hope that we signed up because of our values. And then in the bottom right, we have, what can we do to maintain the relationship above? What are the concrete practical things? What if we ran out of money? What would we do? And so in that bottom, we have 2 things. Civil Connections many years started an idea of a small grant. Jackie, you're an expert on this, I'm sure. But we really then went back and said, we need to activate that even more. And not for us. It was actually for the relationships with the people that are counting on us. And we had a lot of questions on the people we are collaborating with. Should we take in new partnerships? And of course, that we discussed a lot, but are they the same values? What are their aspirations? So we actually found ourselves being even more critical on which partner, who is the new partner and what's their path, where are they going? And I think that defines our internal. And then of course, the last one is when we have set up a grant mechanism and we are thinking about an investment mechanism right now, especially for our partners in rural Africa, who should be part of that investment mechanism?
So going back to basics.
Yeah, can anyone come in, or are we going to be, again, use exactly the same? So it's really going back to this. How are we going to survive? How, and not just us, but also our partnerships. How do we make that work?
Okay, so your one thing is go back to basics and get the partnerships right.
Yeah.
Jackie, what's your one thing?
I wrote it here so that I'll really be quick. This work will go on. This work is bigger than me. It is part of me, but it is not about me.
Yeah.
And me, whether Jackie, whether CivSource, So who we center, we the people. It's always has been, always will be about the people.
Thank you. Ali?
I mean, what to say after what Jackie mentioned? The only thing I would add is echoing what they both mentioned, and I would say go back to first principles, go back to the basics, why we are doing that, build from there, and remember every leader is an ambassador of hope and also ambassador of growth. So invest in your teams, on the people around you, and if you are an individual right now, have some faith. Believe that tomorrow will be better. We dealt with such situations before. I'm confident that we, the people, will be able to deal with so many other challenges.
Thank you all for a great conversation. Maybe we'll meet back here next year and see what happened. Aisha, would you like to close us out? What do we need to know?
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's such a rich conversation, and it's so beautiful that it's a continuation from what we had last year and seeing where you are today. So I really encourage you all that are joining to look at the link we put in the chat about the conversation, which has a link to the conversation that we had last year. And as I mentioned earlier, this is the first webinar, part of our webinar series titled Innovating Towards a Viable Future. You can see Kim and I have a very snazzy background, which is very much the theme of our webinar. And we want to have these exciting conversations and bringing together folks in the sector from different geographies, different backgrounds, and really doing what we do best at Humentum, which is being that trusted guide to you all. I have put a link in the chat also, which is a bridge to the future, shifting forward in 2026, that has some reflections that are connected to this very moment of transitioning that we are facing in the social goods sector. And of course, you will see some reflection from our amazing friends and our panelists. Ali and Jacqueline are also featured there, and of course, Kim. And just a final big thank you to you all for joining today. I am going to put our moderator and the panelists LinkedIn on in the chat, and please stay connected. And thank you very much for joining. Take care to you all.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.